Hello fellow researchers and enthusiasts, and welcome to another episode on UNIP Education. I'm your guide and host Raffaele, and today we are diving deep into the realm of one-way between subjects ANOVA. Let's unravel this powerful statistical technique together. So, what is an ANOVA? ANOVA, or analysis of variance, is a test that lets you compare means across different groups. Think of it as an extension of the t-tests, but for 3 or more groups, or we can also call these groups levels. When to use an ANOVA? So imagine you're a psychologist researching the effects of various therapies on reducing anxiety, just as an example. Instead of just comparing 2 therapies, you want to compare 3, 4, or even more. This is where ANOVA shines. But what is the difference between t-tests and ANOVA? Well, while a t-test lets us compare means of 2 groups only, ANOVA takes it up a notch, allowing us for comparisons across 3 or more groups. Instead of running multiple t-tests and increase the risk of errors, especially type 1 errors, ANOVA provides a more holistic and robust analysis. So, what are the assumptions of ANOVA? As always, before we dive into the actual analysis, so before we dive into one-way between subjects ANOVA, we need to ensure that our data meets specific criteria. The 2 main assumptions are normality, which I am sure you know very well at this point, and homoscedasticity, or what you also know, the equality of variances, or the Levene's test for equality of variances. Both of these tests were done in the video on t-tests, so please go to see them in case you don't remember. But how do ANOVAs work in comparison with t-tests? If you remember, already in t-tests we had something called effect size. In the case of t-tests we had or Cohen's d or biserial rank. In the case of ANOVA, instead, we have something called eta square. But let's go in order. So once we run an ANOVA and let's say we find a significant effect, we may wonder, how big is this effect? Enter effect sizes like eta squared, which tells us about the strength of this relationship. But then comes the question, since now we have more than 2 groups, so we do not have only comparison between, let's say, therapy 1 and therapy 2, but we have the comparison between therapy 1 and 2, therapy 2 and 3, therapy 1 and 3, and so on and so forth. So which groups are different from each other? Meaning, let's say, we're doing small t-tests, it is not like this, but just imagine, and you are seeing the difference between each specific group in the larger ANOVA. And this is where post-hoc tests like Tukey, when we have equal variances, or Games-Howell, when we have unequal variances, come in, helping pinpoint where the difference lie. Consider now for this video that we are research studying psychology, investigating learning outcomes based on different teaching methods such as visual, auditory, and kinesthetics. Using ANOVA, we can identify if one method leads to significant better results than others. But now, translating this to our dataset, as you can see on screen, we have different personality disorders clusters. So we have cluster A, cluster B, and cluster C. And then we have stress levels. Imagine wanting to know if individuals with different personality disorder clusters, A, B, or C, so 3 groups, have varying stress. ANOVA can provide those answers. So let us go into Jamovi and see how it works. So as you can see from the screen, we will absolutely click on ANOVA. Not on t-tests, not on regression, on ANOVA. And now is where different philosophical stands kick in. What I would recommend, even though here you see one-way ANOVA and is what we are doing, I would recommend clicking always on ANOVA, in as much as it provides a better snapshot of our dataset. So we will click on ANOVA. We have a dependent variable, in our case stress levels, and we have fixed factors, or rather our independent variable or our grouping variable. So personality disorders, and we put it here. Now, we have not significance or anything, but let us go into steps. First of all, we want to see the effect size. I would say let's look at eta square. Then we have overall model tests, which is not useful in this case, in as much as we have only one-way ANOVA. Then we have assumption checks, we have homogeneity, and we have normality. Contrast we do not need. Post-hoc we do need in case of significance. So in this case we do not have significance, and so we do not need the post-hoc. And then we have estimated marginal means to just see the means of our data sets. So we have here the first table, which gives us the results of our ANOVA. As I said before, our p-value is unfortunately above 0.25, and hence the ANOVA is not significant. Let us look at the assumptions, which of course we should do before. Levene is met, Shapiro-Wilk is met, in as much as we need to remember that for Shapiro-Wilk and Levene's, p has to be above 0.05 or 0.05 in case you're not doing APA. And in this case, they were both met, and so it was fine. And here you just have the estimated marginal mean, which will just give you a snapshot of the descriptive statistics of your data. Now, let us imagine that we are going a bit more into depth into our clusters. We actually now have only cluster B, and we have three groups. We have narcissistic personality disorders, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder. And again, we're measuring the stress levels, and we're trying to see via an ANOVA, one-way between subjects ANOVA, which of these cluster B psychopathologies will have the highest level of stress. I'm sure that you can imagine already what would be the result, but once again, let's look into Jamovi. So, analysis, ANOVA, ANOVA, cluster B into fixed factors, stress levels into dependent variables, and this time we have a significant difference. So, let us look at the effect size, which before we did not need, in as much as effect sizes tell us something only when our results are significant. Otherwise, it's like putting decorations on a burnt cake. That's what my teacher always used to say. So again, assumptions, normality and homogeneity, and they are not respected, but that's fine. Like ANOVA is robust enough, so normality is not a big deal, still better to have it, but it's fine. And Levene's, we do not have equal variances, meaning that if you remember correctly, we will have to do a different post-hoc test. So, as you can see, we can put here in post-hoc test cluster B, so the grouping variable, into this box in order to tell our Jamovi to compare, subgroups. Jamovi gives us for one-way ANOVA directly Tukey, because usually it's what is mostly used together with Bonferroni. However, as you can see over here, we actually do not have Games Howell. And this is because this time is where the one-way between subjects, actually, the one-way ANOVA is actually more useful. But let us just look at Tukey for now, and I will just explain you in a second what it means. So, again, as I said, we should theoretically use Games Howell in as much as we do not have equal variances, meaning that Levene's has been violated. However, we can see that the significant difference is among all the three groups, meaning narcissistic and antisocial. There is a significant difference between them. There is a significant difference between narcissistic and borderline, and there's also a significant difference between antisocial and borderline. And let us see which of these has the highest stress level. Just put tables because they're easier to read. And we have, of course, borderline personality disorder having higher stress levels. But let us look into the actual one-way ANOVA. As you can see, we have very few options in comparison to the previous ANOVA tab. And this is why it is usually not recommended to use this one-way ANOVA function. But since, as you can see here, we have Games Howell, let us do this one just for the sake of explanation. So grouping variable, cluster B, stress level, dependent variables, and you have again descriptive tables, homogeneity, normality, but we don't assume them equal because we already know they're not equal. And we will just test here on games how well. So you can see the difference are still significant and the values are absolutely the same. So in the end of the day, when you have small data, it doesn't really matter too much whether you're using games owl or 2K, but again, to avoid type 1 errors or increasing any sort of error, it is better to just stick to the procedure. And that was it for today's deep dive into One-Way Between-Subjects ANOVA. Keep those questions coming in the comments or via email, and don't forget to like and subscribe to UniP Education for more analytical and statistical insights. I'm Raffaele, and remember, every data point tells a story. Catch you in the next episode.